They're coming to take me away. They're coming to put me in jail.
Oh, this is terrible.
Lock me up and throw away the key. I don't even know where I'll be. They might come for you too. Oh, hey, folks!
Yabba dabba doo! Pretty cool, man.
Oh, I'm just fiddling around with a song idea. Hello, folks. Welcome to News and Blues 14. 14 because it's the 14th News and Blues I've done while here in the Portland area. Boy, there's a lot going on out there in the world. And I recommend watching the CBS Evening News or the NBC Evening News. You know why? Because you got to know what the enemy is telling you. That's right. They're telling you all about Syria and how the Syrian government is posing a serious threat to innocent civilians. They're massacring children, and they're terrible. They got to be. We have to intervene. I mean, there's just nothing else to say about it. We have to intervene. Well, those of you who have woken up a little bit, you probably already know what the mainstream news, what their game is. But I encourage you to watch them as you wake up to the real news behind the news. And you'll see their little games. You'll see how they operate. So that was last night. You know, we're so humanitarian. I mean, the military-industrial complex, it just can't stand by and see innocent people slaughtered. Here's a little clip to fill you in a little bit on the other perspective of that.
Journalist and editor Patrick Henningsen in the US for more on the role of the media. Patrick, just how big a role then has the media played in the Syria conflict so far, and has it had any impact on the situation there?
Well, I think the media has played a massive role in Syria. Again, I hate to harken back to Libya, but if you look back at Libya, the reports that led to the UN resolution 1973, a lot of them came from the Libyan opposition. And we're seeing the same thing in Syria with the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is in London, and the Syrian National Council, it's based in Paris. You have these kind of foreign bodies, these odd foreign bodies feeding these human rights statistics and building up the death count, when in fact now Human Rights Watch has just been implicated really in covering up rebel abuses in Syria. And that's a major thing, because if you think the whole thing in Syria, Bill, is really based on a humanitarian issue. That's how it's framed in the media in the West. And we don't know where these statistics are coming from. CNN's been caught staging fake news with Danny Dayem, which we wrote about at Infowars.com. So we've got big problems here with the framing of the issue and through the media lens.
Certainly many resignations from Al Jazeera as well, the Arabic channel, not the English service, but the Arabic service. Do you think there could be perhaps some sort of religious divide between Sunni and Shias, which is causing that sort of editorial control over organizations like that in the Arab world?
Well, you can play Sunni off Shia, and I think you just have to ask the West, because they seem to be the experts at this. Ever since the Iraq invasion in 2003, they've kind of made an enterprise out of playing tribes or Sunni against Shia. The resignations mostly came out of the Beirut office of Al Jazeera. And this really, I don't think, has anything to do with religion as much as it has to do with the fact that Qatar is so in bed with the United States, is so in lockstep with Washington. It really compromises their journalistic integrity. And Bill, you know, I'm a journalist, you're a journalist, and there's thousands of journalists out there. And if you're seen to be skewing the news, and you realize you're working for an organization that's not reporting the news, you really have to think about your whole purpose of being there. And that's why I'm glad I'm working with Infowars.com, and I'm very happy to be reporting for a network like yours, Bill.
Well, just one thing, though, about the Syrian government. Do you think in some ways the fact that they've limited access to journalists to the country has made it far more difficult?
Well, that's a very good question, and you can look at it from that point of view. But let's look at it from the other flip side of that: the whole embedded reporter sort of trend that we saw from the Iraq War and onwards. So we've had a steady diet of embedded reporting out of Afghanistan and also out of Iraq. Now, Syria has its reasons, particularly because of the amount of spies that have been outed or busted, some of which have been working for NGOs. This is all across the Middle East. Lebanon themselves busted a spy ring, CIA and a British spy ring, and also Mossad members back in November. Okay, so does Iran has done the same thing. So when you have foreign fighters and loads of intelligence people running around undercover in your country, there has to be some restrictions, I believe.
Of course. Patrick, it's interesting you're talking about skewed journalism. Do you think that social media and citizen journalism is now playing a role in getting information out of the conflict zones and could in fact counter the sort of information we're seeing from some news organizations?
Well, we got to be careful because also the mainstream media picks up on citizen journalism. I'm talking about mobile phone videos. I'm talking about uploaded YouTube videos, some of which CNN and BBC have been caught red-handed using things that would look to be from one side and then flipping them to look like the government was marching or this group was doing that. They've just reversed it. Citizen journalism, though, is on the way up. The ratings from places like Russia Today or from websites like Infowars.com, we're absolutely burying MSNBC.com, we're burying CBS.com, ABC. We're the #1 alternative news thing on the web. Russia Today is making massive strides against the mainstream media, and the reason is, Bill, because people have a hunger for the truth, and if I want to be a media consumer, I want to see what's really going on, and that's what some of us are doing, and that's obviously not what CNN is doing, as has been shown the last 2 weeks.
It's always good to get your view on what's happening there in Syria. Patrick, let's move away from the media issue. Just very briefly, the UN Security Council, at last we've seen a consensus. They're calling for a ceasefire. A lot of words and no action. What do you think is going to happen next? Should there be some action now? Just briefly.
Well, I think the split in the Security Council is really a fundamental one. The U.S., Britain, and their allies sit on one side of the table, and they would like a ceasefire, but they do not want to disarm the rebel groups. Okay, they're kind of wanting them to run wild through the streets of Damascus and so forth. And this is the exact same sort of paradigm we saw in Libya. Now, Russia has also said that they would entertain something similar to the proposal put forward by former UN Chief Kofi Annan. But critics are saying that Russia is just using this to kind of buy time and playing the political game. Obviously, this does come down to politics when you talk about the UN and the Security Council, because it is a political body.
Patrick Henningsen, live there in the States. Thanks so much for your time and your thoughts here on RT.
So I'm wearing my summer shirt. It's officially summer now, and thank goodness we're done with all the flag waving. What do we got on tap here? Yeah, well, I wanted to mention, if you caught any of the news about Chicago last week, there was some big meetings, some globalists were meeting in Chicago, and there was talk of a terror plot, and they showed 4 or 5 young white guys who were suspected of being domestic terrorists. You see, that's the whole angle now they're pushing, is for get rid of these domestic terrorists, you know. And after 9/11, one of the big reasons why they put all of this surveillance police state in place was keep track of all of us potential terrorists. And if you've ever seen the movie Minority Report with Tom Cruise, the situation is not unlike that, as with many Hollywood films, which are many of them have to do with technologies that already exist and that are being used. And you think it's fiction. But yeah, pre-crime, we're moving towards the time when pre-crime is going to be judged. You're going to be just assessed to be planning something, and you'll be, ready to to arrest before you can have a chance to do the crime. But we are the terrorists. We are the terrorists now. And it turned out those kids in Chicago, they had beer brewing equipment. And that was, originally they said that was bomb making apparatus. And it turned out to be beer making equipment. But they're coming up with all kinds of ways to watch us. And in addition to the camps that I told you about last week in the last show, they've come up with, oh goodness, technologies that'll just blow your mind. Here's a little bit about your drone technology that you hear about overseas, supposedly watching Al-Qaeda, the mysterious, shadowy Al-Qaeda, which was actually an invention of the CIA, and it all started back when the Soviets were fighting in Afghanistan in the 80s. And it's a long story, but I hope you watched the film last week in the last show about the nationalistic myth that we're conditioned to grow up with, and the nobility that lies behind all of the causes the United States pursues. Like saving, like right now, going into Syria and saving the innocent children. But here's a drone. A little bit about the drones. They're soon going to be maybe even arresting you, chasing you down, maybe even arresting you. So by all means, sit on your couch and don't raise your voice at all. Don't protest. Don't raise any objections at all, and you'll be maybe one of the last ones to go. Okay? You just play along with them, but here's a little bit about drone technology.
Divide and conquer is the motto. And as long as people continue to see themselves as separate from everything else, they lend themselves to being completely enslaved. The men behind the curtain know this, and they also know.
The United States government has a history of commandeering military technology. It's happened over the years. You have tear gas, tasers, you go down the line. All these came out of military warfare technology, things that were developed for fighting a so-called enemy. Now the United States government is commandeering the use of drones to be used on American soil and American airways, and primarily to create the next large step toward the electronic concentration camp. Eventually drones will be equipped with tasers, tear gas.
The Montgomery County Sheriff's Office has a new crime-fighting tool. The county revealed their Shadowhawk drone from Vanguard Defense Industries. Now, it's the first of its kind right here in our state. The 29-pound, 72-inch-long drone has an infrared camera for nighttime and can be fitted to fire grenades. But the county officials say the drone will mostly be used to help with missing person cases. A grant from the Department of Homeland Security helped pay for the equipment that cost $250,000.
Divide and conquer is the motto.
Hey, heads up, if you're near Houston, the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office is getting a drone. Yeah! The chief deputy there reportedly has not ruled out putting weapons on his drone. You go, Houston. According to the news app The Daily, which is owned by the parent company of this network, the deputy said he does not plan to arm the drone anytime soon. But he also said adding a tear gas dispenser or a gun that shoots non-lethal rubber bullets could be, quote, advantageous. Of course, this will not be the only unmanned aircraft watching U.S. soil. Surveillance drones are already in use across the South, and the Department of Homeland Security has acknowledged it has a fleet of drones for watching U.S. borders and has for years.
Divide and conquer is the motto.
It's begun already, as I told you. Oh, I told you. And you didn't then, and you still don't get it now. We're becoming a police state before your very eyes. After 9/11, you were so freaked out, so scared, so vulnerable. And look, so was I. Believe me, I understand. I was there too. But something happened. And I first noticed it with the Patriot Act and then this wild hyper-surveillance. FISA courts were sidestepped, and I said, uh-oh. And then came more surveillance and more monitoring from every conceivable angle you could imagine. And then came the stage we're in now. Hyper-militarization. Police act like soldiers, armies. And when I tell you this, I blame myself for not being able to explain it better. This is critical that you understand this. Since time immemorial, there has been a deliberate firewall between military and law enforcement. Listen to me, posse comitatus. Stop trolling for porn and Google it. Look it up. We're like some third world totalitarian regime where it's martial law. Slowly, insidiously is happening, and for reasons I'll never get.
The local police department's using unmanned spy planes to catch suspects. Tops our look at stories around the news nation. According to the LA Times, the Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota has helped local police track down suspects at least 24 times since June. The drones are similar to the ones used for unmanned operations in Afghanistan. Privacy advocates say that
Nelson County, North Dakota Sheriff Kelly Yonke went looking for 6 missing cattle on a Brossard family farm when 3 armed Brossard brothers chased him away. Yonke called the Highway Patrol, a SWAT team, a bomb squad, and a Predator drone operated by U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The drone was used to surveil the property until the Brossard brothers were observed to be unarmed. Then the SWAT team moved in to make the arrests.
Freedom and liberty
are being lost in deference to a false sense of security. Who could feel safe with a drone watching them while they're in their backyard?
I mean, they can watch everything we do all day long, all night long, and all the next day. And then you might as well live in Havana.
I have 2 words for you: Predator drones. You will never see it coming. You think I'm joking?
Well, as you're starting to see by now, they're always looking for ways to justify the curtailing of our liberties, you know. And the internet, where would we be without the internet in this day and age? You know, it's way, way too dangerous to the globalists. And because everybody's starting to find out about them, right? They're meeting in Bilderberg this week as I sit here and tape. They are meeting in Chantilly, Virginia. I showed you last week. I showed you clips from last year's Bilderberg conference in Switzerland, where I guess close to 1,000 protesters showed up. Hopefully this year there'll be 10,000 people out there, and the globalists are getting nervous. They don't want people knowing about them, but you know, they've tried 3 different things now to shut down the internet, and thank goodness there was intelligent people who knew enough about computer science to put up blackball, or they dissuaded, put off, forestalled the implementation of SOPA, S-O-P-A, and there was another one, and now they're back with CISPA, C-I-S-P-A. It's another cyber terrorism tool, you know, to put regulations and rules on the internet, and you know, like, well, that's all we need is more regulations and taxes and rules, and you know, you'll find more and more lately. I don't mean, you know, remember my family recently got sent a letter that she hadn't paid a speeding fine In 2006, they're cleaning up their records, and they came across all of these old records. Now she's being threatened with the loss of her Maine license because they say she didn't pay her speeding ticket in 2006 in New York State, which New York State, one of the worst states for bureaucracy and red tape. The fact is, they can do anything they want. So far. I mean, there's so many laws and rules and regulations in place. They can do anything they want to you. They can take your license away and make it so you can't drive. And if you do drive, well, you'll end up in jail. So what choice does she have? My family member, she has to pay the fine all over again. Hundreds of dollars. And her salary isn't increasing, but the cost of everything else sure is. But here's a little bit about the cyber attack possibilities.
According to U.S. officials, it's the looming threat facing our nation today. But you won't be able to see it, hear it, or feel it coming because it will be in cyberspace.
In today's world, acts of terror could come not only from a few extremists in suicide vests, but from a few keystrokes on the computer, a weapon of mass disruption.
It's cyber terrorism, and the fear is being ramped up by the day.
In the not-too-distant future, we anticipate that the cyber threat will pose the #1 threat to our country.
It is not a matter of if, but when a cyber Pearl Harbor will occur.
It's so pervasive that there's even an entire exhibit dedicated to it at the Washington, D.C.'s Spy Museum, a museum whose executive director spent 36 years at the CIA.
There will come a time, and it will be within our lifetime, it'll probably be relatively soon, when there will be probably a major cyber terrorist attack.
The strike could come from enemies abroad.
So we know there's probably a half-dozen countries in the world that have developed cyber weapons.
Wreaking havoc, they warn.
We're going to have a massive cyber attack which will disrupt activities in this country.
And the hype is working. A new poll shows that Americans are now more worried about cyber terrorism than actual terrorism. Government officials also point the finger at hacktivists, like the leaderless group of Anonymous, who have been calling for civil unrest in the U.S.
We are calling upon the citizens of the United States to physically protest,
warning that the group may launch cyber attacks on infrastructure.
The scale of such a possible attack is mostly unknown.
To combat the threat, Congress is pushing through legislation, most recently CISPA, or the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act. It would increase surveillance by allowing corporations to give confidential user data to the federal government, but critics warn these bills are paving the way for government abuse.
When it comes to protecting our civil rights and civil liberties, we don't usually give government a blank check. And that's really what these bills have done in a lot of ways.
These laws could also be used to capitalize off the threat of cyber terrorism by impeding net neutrality.
Well, it could be a competitive threat. It could be something that we wouldn't really, you and I, describe as a cybersecurity threat, but merely just a threat to their current bottom line or to their business.
CISPA has already passed the House and is awaiting a Senate vote. One thing is clear. The government will continue its attempt to control the internet, and the blanket threat of cyber terrorism may be the perfect way to convince the people to give up their rights to privacy on the net once and for all. Abby Martin, RT, Washington.
Well, you know, I suspect that it hasn't touched you yet, this totalitarian tiptoe. It hasn't affected you personally yet, so you just go ahead and go on and ignore it and bury your head further in the sand. But this country is becoming increasingly less free. The liberty is slipping away, and that is because you're not paying attention. One of the founding fathers said the cost of liberty is eternal vigilance. And Americans are anything but vigilant. I mean, the most complacent, overweight, overfed, spoiled population in the face of the earth. But we're not free. We're no longer as free. We may be freer than certain countries in some respects, but you don't see it because things are happening in the background very quietly, and they're not, again, not reported by your whore media. Your mainstream prostitute whore media just simply would rather tell you about dancing puppies or some feel-good story or some lie about some disease, and or anything but the truth. So how about the fact that they want to crack down on organic farmers because they're threatening the increasing proliferation of the huge agribusiness with the whole establishment has been increasingly taking over the agricultural business and the food business, because they want to control the food. I mean, you control the food, you control the population. So small farms are getting raided. Amish farmers in particular have been getting raided and harassed by officials. And here's just one story of many about raw milk producers being harassed unduly, and a lot of their stuff was ruined. They just charged in and ruined things. Here's her story.
This is a peaceful, serene place, and these people come from Los Angeles County and invade.
There was a loud banging on the back gate.
And I said, what's going on? He goes, we have a warrant to search the premises.
And then they drew their guns.
I was scared. I didn't know what was going on.
One of my worst days, one of my family's worst days.
Had this armed raid uncovered a weapons stockpile, foiled a terrorist plot? No. What government agents were after was this: raw milk, a danger to society, or so the Food and Drug Administration tells us. The FDA warns raw milk can cause vomiting, diarrhea, and worse. But not everyone is so worried about these risks.
All raw meat, raw cheese, greens, eggs, honey, milk.
It's pure and healthy and makes me feel good.
This is Rawsome Foods, a private membership club in Venice, California. Before entering, members sign a waiver stating that they actually want food that has not been heated or pasteurized. In fact, that's the whole point, explains the club's manager, James Stewart.
It's how nature provides the food without man becoming involved in pasteurization, homogenization, processing of any kind. The class of foods most scrutinized, it seems to us, is anything having to do with raw dairy. Raw milk, whether it's cow or goat.
In the past 3 years, there have been at least 8 government raids across the U.S. involving raw dairy, according to the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. In this security camera footage, we see agents entering Rawsome's kitchen, guns drawn. Jarrell Winterhawk, a manager, has worked at Rawsome for 4 years and was there the morning of the raid.
We heard a banging on the back door. One of my workers, helpers, he went out there and says, hey, there's a cops out here.
The police presented a warrant, so Jarrell let them in.
They made me get out of the kitchen, and I had to go sit over there on a chair, and they searched me.
They started walking around. They drew their guns, and I'm like, why are you drawing guns?
I didn't know what was going on. I mean, it seemed like they thought we had cocaine in the papayas or something.
Guns drawn is way beyond and above the call of duty.
The raid on Rawsome involved no less than 5 government agencies: the FDA, the Los Angeles Health Department, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, and the California Department of Food and Agriculture. All 5 of these agencies declined interviews for this story, saying the investigation was ongoing. The agents proceeded to collect what they called samples for the case.
They took 24 jars of the same kind of honey. For what purpose? If you're taking a sample of something, you need 1 jar of that honey, not 24.
They just went into our freezer and they just took gallons and cheeses and whatever they wanted.
They deliberately left this door open and the curtains open so it would spoil the food. And they knew this. By the end of the day, they kept it open for so long that a lot of stuff had gone hot and they couldn't sell it.
Thousands and thousands of dollars worth of food.
They don't want to see this happen. They want to stop this from happening. They're going to shut us down whenever they can, in whatever way they can.
The agents were collecting samples of goods supplied to Rawsome by this Santa Paula farm. And this Santa Paula operation is where the story really begins. Sharon Palmer and her 3 children run Healthy Family Farms, which has long been under the scrutiny of various agencies for its sale of raw goat milk.
Rawsome had a real desperate need for raw goat milk. And We progressed in building our own dairy and raising our own goats.
Because of Palmer's work with raw goat milk, the farm was raided, and she was arrested.
My children stood by and watched me in handcuffs. People that I had volunteers here just stood back in just horror. They took me down to the county jail, booked me, photographed me like a criminal.
Palmer spent the night in the Ventura County Jail and was never charged. That happened in 2008. She was raided again in 2009 and again in 2010. That raid was coordinated with the raid 70 miles away at Rossum Foods in Venice.
My kids were getting dressed, everybody was getting ready for school. Knock on the door, they proceeded to come on into the house, get everybody out of bed in their pajamas, tell us that they're searching and raiding the farm. Ripped my house apart, all of our records, volunteers on the farm, neighbors picking tomatoes, chased off. This is a peaceful, serene place, and these people come from Los Angeles County and invade. You had over 50 state and county employees raiding this farm and Rossum at the same time. To look at the money that these taxpayers are paying for Los Angeles County District Attorney, Los Angeles County Police, the Sheriff's Department, you tell me how much we paid for that.
It was only after this last raid that the Sheriff's Department got around to charging her. The offense? Improperly labeling her cheese products, a misdemeanor, but still enough to suspend her dairy license.
Are raw foods better for you than pasteurized ones? The science is out on that question. But here's another question. Should we be allowed to decide what we put into our own bodies?
The hell? This is America. How are you going to tell me what I should and shouldn't eat?
We are a private membership club, and people who are here want to be a part of this club.
This is about people putting food into their bodies. And when it gets down to the point of people not being able to make a choice what they want to put into their own bodies, people are going to stand up and say, I don't think so.
We should have the right to choose if we want to eat raw salmon, sushi, or cooked hamburgers. We should have the right to be able to go to McDonald's or go to Rossum.
For now, no charges have yet resulted from the raid on Rossum. But yet another agency, Los Angeles Building and Safety, is threatening to shut them down, this time for illegal structures on the property. Sharon Palmer plans to fight the misdemeanor charge stemming from her cheese's label. She's raising baby goats in the hopes that she'll one day be allowed to sell her dairy.
For Reason TV, I'm Zach Weissmuller.
So, yeah, just go ahead. Don't pay any attention. Go back to your Dancing with the Stars or whatever and go back to work. And hope you don't lose your job either, because you probably won't find another one. I'm pretty well educated. I've got a real good background, extensive background in industry as a technician. I've been looking for 3 years. 3 years for a job. But as far as rules, regulations, a recent ruling has it that if you don't pay your share of the illegal and unconstitutional IRS income tax, which is run by the IRS is run by the central bank, the Federal Reserve, private cartel of banks. And you should have seen the film that I showed about that, which revealed all the details of it. They hatched that whole scheme many, many years ago, and they finally brought it into reality in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act. And now they run the money machine. They can print money at will, causing inflation and deflation. And so we are losing our freedom, ladies and gentlemen. And even myself, recently, I went to Florida. I was driving through Florida, and they take pictures of your vehicle now, and you can't get away with anything. There's cameras everywhere. They sent me a bill saying I hadn't paid, and so I had to pay an extra bill twice because, see, you can't argue with the computers. Aren't you getting sick and tired of computers running everything? And if the computer says that you didn't pay something, sorry. And if you happen to get a person on the phone to talk to, they're never able to do anything. They're powerless. well, that's policy. Or the computer says, you know, this or that. I mean, we are screwed, ladies and gentlemen. So, I want to show you a little bit more about a couple of clips about where you come in, where we, the people, come in, and our real place in this whole play that we call life in the United States. It was set up many years ago, and again, it takes a lot of research and a lot of reading and to dig into the depths of all of this horror story. But you are the collateral, and here's an interesting clip to show you about that.
The state of the union is not good.
Our trade deficit is too large.
We must not go back to unwise spending. This is America.
George Orwell once wrote that the great enemy of clear language is insincerity. When there is a gap between one's real and one's declared aims, one turns, as it were, instinctively to long words and exhausted idioms, like a cuttlefish spurting out ink. You've probably heard confusing phrases like the trade deficit, the falling dollar, the national debt, unfunded liabilities, and so on, which all sound vague and actuarial and vaguely, well, not me. The reality behind these accounting phrases is perfectly monstrous. When someone, a foreigner say, loans money to the American government, what are they getting in return? Well, they are getting promises of interest payments and eventual repayment of the principal. Where does your government get this money? The government is not a business. It does not generate profits in the free market. So where does it get the money to repay its creditors? Are you beginning to understand that it is not dollars that are being sold, or bonds, or agency debt, or treasuries, or anything like that? Where is your government going to get the money to pay off its creditors? It's not pieces of paper, or contracts, or computer bits that are being sold. There is only one thing that the government has to sell. Governments have only one asset that they can use as collateral. Your leaders are selling you. When China lends $800 billion to your government, what they get in return is a guarantee that $10,000 plus interest will be taken from your family at gunpoint and shipped overseas. When a farmer gets a loan from a bank, he uses his livestock as collateral. It is the milk and meat his cows will produce in the future that he will use to pay off his loan. The bank is buying a share in his cows. You are the livestock that your leaders use as collateral. The leaders that you cheer for and throw parades for and drop balloons behind and donate money to are selling you to Chinese rulers, to the Japanese, to the Nigerians, to South American drug lords with accounts in the Caribbean banking centers, to Russia, to Korea, to Egypt, to Colombia, to Chile, to the Philippines, to Malaysia, and anyone else who is willing to give them a few dollars in return for the blood, sweat, and toil of your future. The flag that you praise and the anthems that you sing and the rulers that you weep and kneel before have as much loyalty to you as a plantation owner had to his slaves. And sadly, plantation slaves had more pride than we do. Plantation slaves did not generally praise their masters for selling them off, for auctioning off the lives, hopes, dreams, and futures of their own little children. We can understand that cattle may lick the hand of the farmer who lowers an axe to its neck, because cattle are dumb beasts that cannot comprehend their real relationship with the farmer and his imminent plans for them. What is our excuse? When we chant, USA, 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 when we cheer and bow and beg and scrape and sing and weep with joy that some new farmer now presides over the wholesale dismantling and sale of our family's futures, when we love with obsessive emptiness the leaders who laugh while they auction us off to every tin pot dictator and stockbroker the world over, what is our excuse? Has our pride been so broken that we lunge with pathetic joy at every new silver-tongued demagogue who pretends to care for us even a tiny little bit? In the future, our children will demand to know why we knelt and cheered as they were sold off on the auctioneer's block. This video, and my life's work, is my answer to my child. What's yours?
And who are they? Who are these architects with their plans for global domination? Are they real, or are they just the figment of the overactive imaginations of conspiracy theorists like myself? And are all these things that you've seen, the drones, the arrest of farmers, the increased surveillance, is it all just normal? Is this something we should put up with and live with in the land of the free and the home of the sheeple, or excuse me, brave? They are Bilderberg, and it's just come out, a clip, a short piece, came out recently, amazingly, was aired on in the UK, on national television in the UK. I believe that's what they said. This is a national network. And so, shedding more light on the Bilderbergers and their meeting, which is happening right now this weekend as I speak. Here it is, more on the Bilderberg group.
For the last half-century, an elite organization called the Bilderberg Group has met annually all around the world in total secrecy, behind closed doors and with no official press coverage. It started in 1954 when the world's most powerful people joined forces in the Netherlands at Hotel Bilderberg, where Prince Bernhard, a former Nazi party member, was integral in its formation. Last year it was in Zurich, Switzerland. It was believed that the group discussed how to handle the Arab Spring at that conference. And this year they're meeting in the wealthy city of Chantilly, Virginia, right next to Washington, D.C. The group is comprised of 130 or so of the world's top elites in politics, banking, food, oil, media, and national defense. Some of the most notable attendees have been Ben Bernanke, Bill Clinton, Timothy Geithner, Bill Gates, Tony Blair, and Colin Powell. Others include Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands, Prince Charles, George Soros, and Alan Greenspan. Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller are integrally involved as members of the Bilderberg Steering Committee, which is responsible for carefully crafting who will be attending the meetings every year. Some have called the Bilderberg Group a harmless think tank or just a discussion group, but people who have been following it for years say there's something much more sinister at the root. They claim that the group gets together to plan world policy for a new world order of global domination at the subjugation of the rest of humanity. Unfortunately, you won't hear much of a peep about the group's dealings or even the existence of it on the corporate media. This could be because the media moguls that have attended are sworn to secrecy. Check out what Rockefeller has said about the media coverage of Bilderberg. In his memoirs, multi-billionaire David Rockefeller said, quote, "Some even believe we're part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a much more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. And if that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it." He also allegedly said that he's grateful to media outlets like the Washington Post, the New York Times, whose magazine directors have attended their meetings and promised to keep it discretionary for almost 40 years, saying it would have been impossible for the group to develop its plan for the new world if it would have been subject to the lights of publicity during all those years. And while the public might not know exactly what's going on there, many people agree that the people who attend the meetings are the world's most powerful movers and shakers. Just take a look at this Drudge poll. It's a poll conducted to ask people what they really think of the Bilderberg conference. Over half of the people that polled said that the people who attend the conference are the real power masters of the world. 14% say they think it's just a false conspiracy theory, and 35% say it's a little bit of both. Nonetheless, the secret meeting is definitely coming more and more into the public eye, whether the participants want it to or not. Meanwhile, while Bilderberg attendees were questioned by independent journalists about what really goes on there, they completely skirt the issue or even deny having attended in some instances. So what is really going on in these meetings? Well, all weekend I'll be in Chantilly, Virginia, covering the Bilderberg group to see if we can get a scoop about what the people there are thinking. Thousands are expected to protest, and they'll be there in protest at the conference, and I will be getting coverage and getting back to you on that.
Bilderberg. Shh. It's meant to be a secret. When you hear the name Bilderberg, visions of blacked out limos with nebulous silhouettes of luminaries like David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, and Hillary Clinton might come to mind. But despite the ultra-high profile of the guests, 95% of the global major media outlets have never ever mentioned its name. Tonight, we're going to find out how and why, and who are the major players in this shadowy cabal as we go on the edge. Bilderberg, who are they? What are they? And how have they become able to rule the global social political scene without any public scrutiny, totally under the radar for so long? And what have they got planned for us serfs and vassals in 2012? To help us navigate these questions and to get some answers, we're joined by a very special guest this evening. Among other things, he's on the writing team of Channel 4's 10 O'Clock Live and 8 out of 10 Cats, but he's also a journalist. He's one of the only journalists who has covered the Bilderberg meeting for The Guardian over the last 3 years. Let's welcome Charlie Skelton. Hi, Charlie.
Hi, Patrick. Hello.
So, let's get right down to it. Yeah. Bilderberg, what is it? And who are its members? What's the history of it?
Well, that's a very big question. Fortunately, we've got a bit of time. It's an enormous thing that doesn't get written about. That's one thing. It's a huge security operation that occurs once a year. But in practical terms, it's a group of people, a small group of people, called the Bilderberg Steering Committee, that enlarges once a year to incorporate maybe 130, 140 people. And they go and sit in an exclusive, heavily guarded hotel somewhere in the world, behind a big police cordon with helicopters flying over, and they spend 3 days having a conference, and it's a proper conference. You know, they have their lanyards, they have their table outside where they pick them up, and they have
delegate badges.
Their delegate badges, and it's you know, they've got a schedule and they keep to it. You can see them coming out for a cigarette every so often, if you've got a long lens, and so it's often written off as a talking shop by some people that would like to diminish its importance, but its actual importance can simply be divined from the list of people that attend, and there are now they admit attend, and it's an extraordinary who's who of the power players in international finance, industry, in intelligence, and media ownership, and and with a little sprinkling of European royalty for good measure.
This isn't just any ordinary summit, and also that's one I want you to explain to our viewers. This isn't any ordinary meeting. You know, like the G8 or the G20, you have the heads of state there, and you have the public faces of public policy. This is something very different, just by the nature of the attendees and the way who's on this list. This isn't just people from one industry.
Yeah.
These are the major media moguls. These are the political movers and shakers, the future presidents of America, vice presidential candidates, key people in key positions.
Yeah. There's a little habit they have of managing to invite people to Bilderberg the year before they take high office. You know, for example, David Cameron.
Yep. Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton. You know,
and I heard a story that you know, they always invite the prospective U.S. president to Bilderberg the year or the 2 years before he might be running for his party's nomination. And basically, when Bill Clinton was there in 1991 or 1990, he was they make them open doors and you know, bring the water to the table, almost like, you know, these are your new bosses, and this is Mr. Clinton or Mr. Obama.
There's a really interesting quote actually from Clinton, which you can look up, which is he's talking about the fact his campaign manager, and I just can't remember the name. There's too many names.
James Carville,
possibly, invited him, sort of took him along to Bilderberg and said, you know, here's the new guy, you know, kind of thing. And Clinton says it was at that point he kind of realised he'd gone up a level, and he was suddenly, you know, the kind of hand of the lottery had come down and gone, it could be you. And so yes, so
Tony Blair was at Bilderberg?
Yeah, and he's lied. He's lied to Parliament about going, which is quite serious.
When was he there?
Okay, I can't remember.
But
there's too many facts.
Before he was PM?
I think it's the year before.
So before he became PM. Okay.
Yeah.
Because in America, the Logan Act forbids public servants from, you know, non-state meetings with foreign entities. Elected officials they're forbidden by U.S. law.
Your James Steinberg, Deputy Secretary of State, was there last year. He's on the list, and he was meeting in private with the UK's Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, who was there. Contrary to what they say, they Bilderberg, in whatever small amount of literature they have, their website, Bilderberg meetings, they always stress, no, that people are here in their private capacity. They're here as private individuals. It's very much sort of Chatham House rules. We're just having a little chit-chat. However, I last year rang the Treasury whilst I was there in St. Moritz and said, can you, because we had a photo, someone managed to get a photo of George Osborne coming through in his limo, and I said, can you confirm whether George Osborne, the Chancellor, is here, and if so, in what capacity is he attending this summit? And I spent a whole day practically on the phone to the Treasury, eventually being bumped around and bumped around and bumped around, and they came back with a response, which was, yes, he's here in an official capacity, which is an extraordinary thing.
George Osborne was in St. Moritz last year.
In his official capacity as Chancellor of the Exchequer for 3 days. One of his biggest, you know, you look at the Chancellor of the Exchequer's diary.
A totally secret meeting.
That's a big chunk.
Totally private meeting.
Yeah.
Secret with the heads of captains of industry, the heads of state, or former heads of state. George Osborne's there.
And when people
talking about what?
Well, you know, not making policy, as they insist upon, not making any decisions, etc., etc. But when people say, you know, why are you at all bothered by this event? You know, why can't they just go and have a private chat? Well, precisely because my elected Chancellor of the Exchequer is there with a Treasury official for 3 days as Chancellor of the Exchequer, with the head of Deutsche Bank, the head of Barclays, the head of HSBC, the head of Airbus, the head of Daimler, you know, etc., 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 the head of the NSA, and reporting back not a single sentence about what he did there. Nothing, nothing. So that's just deeply inappropriate. And what I have found in my small number of years of going along and just sort of turning up and seeing what's going on is it's a constant mind problem. I was going to say rude word then. But you get there and I don't know if you know the phrase cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance.
And you're going, hang on, I've just seen, there's helicopters above me, there's armed police, there's more limousines than I've ever seen in my life. There's a, you know, where, depending where you are, there's a, you know, a Navy boat off the shore. And you turn around and there's no, you look around and you think, where's the press?
Yeah.
And you go, well, I don't understand. And I actually took two colleagues of mine who work on dispatches, Channel 4 dispatches, and they're you know, proper journalists, not unlike me. I'm just a hobbyist. But they're proper journalists, and they work in current affairs. And that was their response. They were sort of going, this is a bit odd.
Well,
I don't understand where the press are.
Look at Image 106, if we get that on the screen. You know, the mainstream media, before 2010, I saw a few mentions of it in the Washington Post. They blurbed it in the New York Times last year. Yeah. But before 2010, zero. So you know, explain about that image. Reuters, or you did a search for Bilderberg?
Yeah, absolutely.
The whole Reuters news service and all its archives, how many results did we get?
Yeah, zero.
Zero.
So at the end, that's another part of that. You're there, you think, well, presumably there's some kind of, this is scratched its way into the kind of mainstream news consciousness somehow, but you know, AP and Reuters, that people think of as this kind of crystal clear, you know, outpouring of pure news, don't mention it. And you sort of go, well, that's a bit weird. I don't really understand that. And
my mother's 70, right?
Yeah.
And she didn't know about Bilderberg until 2 weeks ago when I mentioned it to her. And she was active politically her whole life. Yeah. At some time in Washington as well, when we were very young. I said, she was just flabbergasted. Yeah. She's like, what? Who? Yeah. Bilderberg? Who are they? She heard Alex Jones talking about it on the radio, and she's like, what is this Bilderberg? And, you know, she's been alive since 1942.
Okay, well, I spoke to someone, I mean, over and over again this happens. I spoke to the head of a reasonably big TV production company in the UK, he will remain nameless. I was explaining to him that I was off to the Bilderberg conference, and we had this chat, and he couldn't really understand what I was talking about, because he thought it was the Bilderberg conference, and it was some conference about the toy Build-A-Bears, and he'd never heard of Bilderberg. And, you know, I spoke to someone, I rang up the ITV forward planning of their news, and I said, are you interested in covering the Bilderberg conference? And they went, you know, the Bilderberg conference, that rings a bell. And it's when you hear things like that, you go, it's not, as much as there's a conspiracy to keep a lid on this story, the lid's been kept on so well, there's now a kind of conspiracy of ignorance, where people just don't know.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's right. It's creeping fascism. But it's been here for a while. I mean, it should be obvious to anyone that this is a corporate military-industrial complex, and the way it's set up now and running, where the corporations dictate policy, mostly. I mean, that's what the Bilderberg is. The corporate heads and the financiers and the heads of state, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the big bankers. The corporations dictate the policies of the government, and the government says, well, we need money, so we have to do what you guys say. So I don't even think the government is really the last say-so. It's really the big money that has the last say-so. So the big banking families and the big moneyed interests, they really run things. And if you don't believe it, you're very naive. You're very naive. And I hope you're getting the idea of what's really going on. So keep tuning in, and I appreciate you watching tonight. Send me an email, let me know what you think. This is Rob Spear for News and Blues, and good night.
Gleaming faces in the checkout counter at the Church of Fame.